Hey guys, my name is Dasha. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video, which is going to be a wrap up of everything I read in the month of November. If you saw my November TBR and October wrap up, you'll know that October was like an abysmal reading month for me. I kind of had some other things going on in my personal life and I kind of hit a bit of a slump. But November went a lot better. I not only just got excited about some things that I was reading, but I also had my readathon. If you don't know, I started a readathon based on my TBR game, a game of tomes, and I run this with Ray and Robin, and we had our first mini round at the beginning of November, and it was so much fun. I absolutely loved creating it, and it really got me inspired to pick up a few different things that I maybe wasn't planning on picking up as soon, but I'm glad I got through them. So those books will be talked about as well as a few others, and let's just get right on into it. As you know, I usually go in my order from my least favorite to my favorite, so let's go. So this month I had a DNF, which was Sin Eater by Megan Campisi. This is a historical fiction novel about women who eat foods representative of people's sins at their funeral. That way the person can continue on to heaven cleansed of their sins, but our main character discovers that there's some kind of royal deadly plot happening when she goes to the funeral of someone that lived up in the castle, and there's all sorts of kind of seedy things happening. Unfortunately, I had to DNF this about 120 pages, 130 pages maybe in, because I just couldn't go any further. Honestly, the writing made me extremely uncomfortable, and I just really didn't like where the plot was heading. The writing specifically, I can't put my finger on what it is that made me feel so uncomfortable. I think it was the author's focus on certain things, which is funny because I like horror and thrillers, right? You guys know that even in my fantasy, I tend to like gore. I'm not opposed to that, but the author was using the word cunny a lot instead of just saying like my vagina. That's all you had to say. Or like it reached my pelvis. I don't know, something. Don't say cunny, please. And then the character was just making these decisions that made me really uncomfortable. I got a lot of secondhand embarrassment from the book that just, I didn't like it. I don't even think, sometimes I DNF books, but I can say that I could still recommend them. This isn't even one of those like instances. I just don't think I recommend this. I don't think it's that good. I was really hoping it would be. I was hoping it'd maybe be like an underrated recommendation I could give, but overall it's just not something I enjoyed. I don't know who would enjoy this, but this really wasn't for me, and I'm gonna be glad to get rid of it. The next book I want to talk about is a horror novella. It is Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones. I actually read 2 Stephen Graham Jones books this month, surprisingly, but this was the second one that I'd read, and I like this one a little bit less than the other one, or they were pretty equal actually. This is again a novella, and it is set around this group of friends who have this like mannequin that they used to just fool around with when they were younger, and then for like one last prank they bring the mannequin back out, and then the mannequin comes to life, and there's a little bit of, you know, murdering happening perhaps. This was very interesting in the thematic content. Like, I would recommend this for fans of My Best Friend's Exorcism, actually. It had some similar themes about growing up and friendships, especially in high school. Maybe not specifically female friendships, but friendships in general, and kind of growing up and leaving your friends, that kind of thing, and dealing with friendships as you get older, especially in high school. And I could tell where the plot was going right away, but that didn't make it less enjoyable. Like, this is not a book I think has like a twist necessarily, but that doesn't make it less fun. I think it was like fun and campy, and it was fine. It was good. I would recommend it if you're looking for something quick, especially if you're looking to read something, again, kind of like My Best Friend's Exorcism, something in the late summer, early fall, where it's not quite like spooky season, but it's just kind of light and different. That's kind of the best way I could describe this. It's not like anything I'd ever read. It's definitely not my favorite Stephen Graham Jones, but I quite enjoyed it for what it was. It accomplished what it came to do, and it was enjoyable. His other book that I read this month was My Heart is a Chainsaw. This is a horror based on slashers. This high school senior girl is obsessed with slashers, and so once she sees the makings of one in her small town, she goes into like full getting prepared mode. She tries to train who she thinks is the final girl to be ready for it. She is trying to look for all the clues, and this I liked more than Night of the Mannequins, but I still love The Only Good Indians the most. His writing style is very hard to get through. It's a little bit flow of consciousness, so if you're looking for new audiobooks, I would recommend all his books on audio because they're a lot easier to get through. But overall, I liked what this did in terms of using the genre not as a crutch, but rather as a stepping stone. I really liked how he implemented certain tropes and occurrences from the slasher genre, especially in movies, and kind of made them his own. I really, really liked how everything played out. The beginning was really slow to get through. I was kind of slogging through it and I wasn't really sure I liked where it was going. The main character was like driving me absolutely insane. But once the action kicked off, once the actual like slashery part of the book kicked in, it was just a lot of fun. I was able to speed through it, and I would really recommend this for anyone who enjoys horror and slashers and is looking for something a bit different than just a regular slasher. This has some interesting discussions in it and some interesting ideas. It does, of course, like some of his books do, implicate indigenous culture because the author himself is indigenous, and I really liked how that was tied into it. Maybe not necessarily a focal point of it, but it just kind of interacted with the culture in a different way that we saw in The Only Good Indians. And I don't know, I really enjoyed it for what it was. It's not by any means what I would call like an incredible book. It wasn't the best thing I've ever read. There was, like I said, a lot of things with the main character that drove me absolutely ballistic, and the writing style was like really frustrating. But overall, yeah, I gave this like 3 stars, 3.5 stars. I thought this was really fun, and what a perfect way to end spooky season with some good old slasher references. Next is a book that I read during some live reading sprints for the readathon, and that was Berserk Volume 1 by Kentaro Miura. So this is a horror fantasy manga, and it is friggin' dark and grim. In terms of what I got from plot, you're basically following someone who is this like legendary knight who's like really well known to just be pretty brutal, and he is very brutal in person too. He's not like someone who's like known to be one thing but is another. No, he's good at what he does, and he's pretty brutal, and he is just on a quest for revenge, as far as I could get. I did give this a 4-star when I finished it, but looking back, I think I'm gonna lower it to 3, just because the second I finished reading it, I kind of forgot some of the things that happened. And I also realized not long after finishing this that I will not be continuing the series, at least definitely not now. There are 40 volumes in this, and I just don't have the patience, and I don't care enough about the story to continue through all of them. I just don't think it's really for me. There's nothing bad with it, which is why initially I gave it a 4-star, because I enjoyed what it did, but there's no way I'm gonna sit through 40 volumes of this, not when I have a massive backlist of even other manga to read, let alone other fantasy and horror. But I think if you can handle it, this could be enjoyable for you. But it is pretty intense, and it's not like the most pleasurable thing to read, but it is interesting. I also just didn't really vibe with the art style. That was another thing that I just didn't love. I feel like that's a very important part of manga and graphic novels, and this one just wasn't 100% for me. But it was a good read while I was reading it. It just doesn't have the same hold on me that my favorite manga books do. Next, I want to talk about Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty. So this is the 3rd book in the Daevabad trilogy. This is an adult fantasy inspired by Middle Eastern folklore and mythology. So we've got some jinn, and we've got some magical creatures like shadus, that, you know, giant winged lions. All sorts of really cool stuff. And since this is the 3rd book, I can't go into details of the plot of this, but essentially in the first book, you're following Nari, who is a con artist in Cairo, and one day she accidentally summons a jinn warrior who takes her to Daevabad, the city of her ancestors, and she learns that she has jinn blood in her. And this was funny because I buddy read the whole trilogy with Ray, and we were talking about it. She ended up giving this book a 2-star, and I gave it 4 stars. She ended up really not liking it, and I just like, I don't know what it is. This book got to me. I was crying towards the end. I was feeling all sorts of things. After the slump that was the 2nd book, I started the book off feeling a little bit cautious, I guess, and I didn't really love it for the first little while. But then once we got into more of the action, we really got to see more of the world, which I loved, because the main draw in this series for me is a couple of the characters, Nadi, Ali, Muntadir, Zainab. Some of the characters I absolutely love, and the other draw is the world. There are not a lot of fantasy worlds I would want to visit, but this is one of them. It is just so richly imagined. It doesn't have like a clear defined magic system. It just is magic, and I fucking love that. I find it just so immersive, and the author did a great job at just putting us in this world and just surrounding us with magic that didn't have to be explained. It was just there, and I love that. And we got more of this world in this book. We got more of the creatures and more of the interaction between them. We got more lore, things were explained, and I just absolutely loved it. We got character development. I don't know if you remember the wrap-up where I talked about the first book, but I didn't like Ali at all. I found him really frustrating and draining as a character, especially because we had his perspective throughout the whole book. and throughout the whole series. But oh my god, he just had a complete transformation for me. I really got to see him for who he is, and it was just so much fun to read. And listen, there were a lot of things about this book I did not like. My copy, I have it on ebook on my iPad, and it's just full of annotations of me saying this doesn't make sense, the logic in this is faulty, I don't understand this. You are dealing with someone who's acting as a tyrant who conquered the city, and they are just completely destroying everything, and you're sitting there and it does not make sense, because there's no way that they can have any kind of prosperous rule if they just destroy everything and kill everyone. And you could argue that her characterization is that she's gone mad and she doesn't care, but it's just very frustrating as a reader because there's no political point to what she's doing. And the rest of the series had been pretty political. There was some maneuverings and some interesting discussions and things happening between other factions and people. And it just seems like it completely fell apart. There was just no logic to a lot of what was happening. That made me really frustrated. Another thing that I really couldn't stand was there are some point of views, especially Nadi's and Ali's, who had these beautiful moments in the world, the larger world, not just Daevabad, and they were interacting with other creatures and other jinn, and it was just really fascinating to get their perspective, and it felt a bit more approachable. Even though things were still happening, there were still those kind of lighthearted moments and the emotional and the connections. And then when you got to the other perspective, I don't know if I should say it because it might be a spoiler, when you got to the other perspective that you're reading from, which is set inside of Daevabad, it's only death, destruction, and those frustrating moments where you're like, this is not sensical, I can't stand this. So it felt very jarring to go from like those more interesting, magical, maybe peaceful, but even not really moments from Ali and Nadi. And then you go to the other perspective and you're just frustrated because you're almost being desensitized to all of the killing that is happening, to all of the torture and the pain, and you shouldn't be desensitized to that kind of thing. And it just got to be almost too much, and it was really jarring, and it was almost like I was just getting frustrated with it. But overall, I felt that a lot of the relationship dynamics and character dynamics, even between the ones that I didn't really like and their point of views and the people they were dealing with, I thought that overall a lot of the dynamics were handled really, really well. I really enjoyed reading about them. I thought they were well thought out. Just maybe some of the political stuff wasn't thought out, or maybe specific characters. But overall, when you pare it down, when you look at those character relationships and their dynamics, they are very complex, they're very well crafted, they're very enjoyable to read from the perspective of just appreciating what they are, because they're not easy, they're not simple, in the sense that none of the characters have a simple relationship with anyone, because these are creatures that are centuries old. The jinn are incredibly intelligent, they are incredibly magical and powerful, and there's a lot of history behind them and families within the jinn community. So the complex relationships that form out of this are just really fun to read about, and they're really enjoyable to read, even though the relationships themselves might be strained or tense or murderous. But overall, I would really recommend this series. I think for me, it kind of had that dip with the second book. I liked City of Brass a lot. I really liked what it was doing, and to me, Empire of Gold felt a bit like City of Brass in that we got the magic and that wonder, and you got to see things happen at like a really fast pace. Like, I just swallowed the book. It was so easy to read, it's so fast to read, and I really, really enjoyed my experience. Would really recommend this series, especially if you're maybe a beginner to adult fantasy. I think this would be a good one. The world and the magic is just fairly simple to grasp. The lore is not so expansive that you just get bogged down in it, kind of like a Song of Ice and Fire, those kind of series. And it's also just a really fast-paced read. The pacing of it reminds me of young adult novels where there's a lot of action happening and a lot of character development at all times. It's not just bogged down by all of these political maneuverings that are incomprehensible and all this other stuff. So I would really, really recommend this series. I personally really enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would going into the third book. Like, the way it ended for me just made a lot of sense, and I'm really, really happy that I read it. All right, so we've got 2 more books left, nothing too crazy. I don't know what order to put these in because one of them is a 5-star, one of them is a 4-star, but I enjoyed them about at the same level. So I think I have a bit less to say about the one that I'm going to talk about first. That is Moon of the Crusted Snow by Wabgia Shigreis. This was a 5-star read for me. This was so fucking good. This is a novel set in an Indigenous community in Northern Ontario, and they slowly start to realize that something is wrong when there's like a rolling blackout through their town, and then they start getting cut off from the rest of the world when it comes to supplies and communication, and things are just kind of shifty, and it happens in the winter, so there's that added element of isolation and cold and danger. Like I said, this was a 5-star read for me because it was just fantastic. This is a very slow-paced apocalyptic book. This is not like a high-octane thriller. This is something that is very more focused on characters and the culture and community. You're kind of working and seeing everything through their eyes rather than the perspective of like the apocalypse and someone trying to survive. It's a different kind of survival, I guess. And I just really enjoyed it. I talked about this in my winter recommendations video, so if you want to see how I liked it from like the atmosphere and the vibe perspective, you can absolutely go check that video out. But that was like one of the big things for me that I loved in this was the wintry atmosphere. It really hit close to home, having dealt with Canadian winters, living in Ontario myself. And so I really liked that aspect of it. But beyond that, I just thought the tension was so well crafted. It was heartbreaking and well written, and it was dark and grim, but also just so well done. I can't put into words how much, like, if you like horror thrillers, apocalyptic books, I think this would be for you. It's super short. It is absolutely worth your time. I didn't expect to be as like absolutely blown away as I was, and I'm so glad I read it. I almost wish I'd read it in the winter because I feel like it would have had even more of an impact, but even then, reading it in November, I was like, yeah, it's coming. Winter's coming. I'm gonna have to deal with a lot of these same anxieties. So absolutely would recommend this. I absolutely love this book. 5 out of 5 stars. I have nothing but praise for it, so I'm gonna cut it off here. All right, the final book I want to talk about, I have a lot of thoughts about, and that is The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. This is the first book in the Wheel of Time, an expansive adult fantasy series. We all know the show just came out because everyone's talking about it, and I thought it would be a good time to pick it up. I've also just been excited for it because a lot of booktubers I like love this series. The series starts off with you following a group of people from a small town. Their town is attacked by things, creatures, and people that support the Dark Lord in this world. The Dark Lord is imprisoned, but he's kind of getting stronger, and thus his creatures are acting in his favor and on his behalf. And so once this town gets attacked, the Aes Sedai in the town realizes that these creatures and the Dark Lord are specifically after a small group of people, and she vows to take them back to the Aes Sedai's stronghold, and you kind of follow their adventure. Now, the Aes Sedai in this world are women who can wield magic. In this world, the magic is kind of finicky. Men can wield it, but it's extremely rare and extremely dangerous. They all slowly go mad because of the use of this magic. Women can wield it. It is still incredibly powerful and incredibly dangerous, but they are able to temper it a little bit better. They're able to control it and not lose their minds as easily as men do. So the Aes Sedai is this order of women who can wield the magic because not everyone has it, and they basically kind of keep an eye on the Dark Lord and all the other affairs in this land. And so this Aes Sedai that was there, Moraine, she is trying to protect the people from this small town as she takes them to the Aes Sedai stronghold because she needs to figure out why the Dark Lord is after these people. So you're following 3 friends who are all boys, as well as 2 women that decide that they want to also join along. And the last member of their group is Lan, who is a warder. He is someone who is supposed to protect the Aes Sedai. So it's really an adventure story. This book is really following their journey and their adventure, but you're really getting a lot of backstory to the world because this small town where our main characters are from is kind of isolated. They don't really get a lot of news from the outside world, and so their knowledge of what's happening as well as their knowledge of greater lore is kind of limited. And so you're getting to see a lot of this from their perspective, which I personally absolutely loved. I thought it was a great way to introduce things to our characters and to the reader. Now, I will say, I understand that, first of all, this is like a 90s fantasy, so a lot of the things that we know today actually stem from this book, and this built off Lord of the Rings. This is important for what it was, but there's a lot of things that we take for granted in modern fantasy that was missing from here and that I didn't personally love. One main thing for me was the world building. I felt like some of the details that we got made a lot of sense, and that was really happy to get, but some of it was lacking, or some of it seemed inconsequential, and I would have rather seen how certain things work that we didn't see. It seems like the characters aren't asking the questions that they should, and so these things aren't being explained, and it's kind of frustrating as a reader when you want more information. Like, if you ask my opinion, our main character, more or less, Rand, seems like a character that is made to be a self-insert for the reader. First of all, he's just a little stupid, which drove me nuts. Him and his friends are all kind of dumb. The woman, Moraine, Nynaeve, and Egwene. Egwene, I love her. She's amazing. She's funny. She's brave. She's smart. I love her. But the men in this book, other than Lan, are just fucking stupid. I like Perrin a little bit, but Mat and Rand are just absolute idiots. They drive me absolutely insane. I can't stand them. And I think Rand, who is kind of our main character, you get the most of his perspective. I think he is, and I'm not sure he's going to remain the main character. From what I know, the series splits more into their individual journeys because they're not staying together and traveling the whole 15-book series, obviously. But I don't know. I found that he was a little too dull, a little too dumb, and it read like the character was meant to be for the reader to see themselves as and go on this great adventure and possibly be the one that the Dark Lord is looking for, but I didn't really like that. I also did not love the pacing. I thought that like sometimes you're getting a lot of nothing and a lot of talking, and then all of a sudden there's like some action, but then you go straight back to talking and walking. There are a lot of things I like though. I don't want to sound like I'm just complaining. This is a good classic friggin' fantasy. You've got your journey, you've got the Dark Lord, you've got these magical creatures, you've got the Chosen One, but like not quite there yet, which is interesting. You've got the magic. Like there's a lot of good things about this. I also really like the humor in this, and I just overall thought that like even things like gender roles, which I've heard some people complain about, I quite liked. I will not elaborate. All I will say is that the men in this world are mostly himbos and not meant to be anything special. Like they're strong and they're eye candy, but they're not meant to be too important. But the women have all the finesse, all the intelligence, all the power, all the knowledge. And I'm okay with that. I'm absolutely okay with that. I quite like it. Listen, I've heard some people say that they didn't like the fact that while the women have all the power in this world, for the most part, some people can wield the magic, but they go crazy. Even though the women wield most of the magic in this world, the Chosen One is still a man. And fair enough, but overall, when you look at the overall gender roles, I fucking love that the men are just kind of, they're strong, they're protective, but they're not the brightest. But like even in the villages where people hold no magic, the women are in charge. There's like the main village council, right? Like there's a mayor and a doctor and the blacksmith, but there's also a women's council, and it seems like they're calling a lot of the shots. And then the person that everyone goes to get healed and to hear like stories about the village is the Wisdom, and it's always a woman, and she's called the Wisdom. So you tell me. I think Robert Jordan said men are good for eye candy and for being strong, while women have all of the intelligence and the power and the finesse, and I am at peace with it. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. I will be continuing with the series, absolutely. I want to read the second book at least before I watch the TV show, but I am planning on watching that, and I can absolutely see how this became such a beloved series. I can see the potential in this, even though the first story was just kind of a traditional journey. I really, really enjoyed a lot of the fantasy elements of this, and I enjoyed the writing a lot. Some people said that like it's too descriptive, and I'm like, yeah, that's good though. I like description. So I would recommend this if you are an adult fantasy fan. Just know going in that it is a little bit lacking on things like world building that we tend to prioritize in our fantasy now, but overall, I really love the characters in this, and I'm excited to see where the series goes. That was it, my friends. That was everything I read in the month of November. Please let me know if you've read any of these and loved these. I would love to hear your opinions because I had a bit of a mixed bag this month. My social media is linked down below. You guys can always come talk to me there. Other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!